Hello and welcome back to the Copenhagen Fintech Lab. We are live here in the Fintech and Dreams track for the final panel debate of the day. What do banks need right now? If only I knew. Thankfully, we have some very, very clever and insightful people who are ready to share their insights on just this topic. Spearheading those people today will be Bryony Widdop of DLA Piper, a global law firm and a good friend of the lab. Many of the startups here in the lab have had great pleasure of their support throughout the time. I won't bore you much more with the introduction. I'll let Bryony take it away from here and introduce the panel. So Bryony, go ahead.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody at the last panel of the day. I am delighted to be joined here with these fantastic four participants for the panel today. So we have Hannah Raftel, who is CEO at Fermento. Hi Hannah, welcome. Michael Pierce, who's Regional Director for the Nordics at Mambu. Hey Michael, hi. We have Andre Rodin, who's a managing director, I should say, at BNP Paribas. Hi, Andre.
D sounds good to me.
Yeah, D. And we have Vital Raviv, who is head of digital strategy and fintech innovation at Bank Afro-Alim. Hi, Vital.
Hi.
Hi. So welcome everybody. And today we're discussing banks. What do they need right now? Well, probably more than we have time for in this 25-minute session. But I think we should launch right in with the first and possibly most controversial question. So what do banks need in respect to fintech? Do they need more? Do they need less? How is it going? Where are we at in terms of that picture of the fintech industry? Do we need more cooperation? Do we need more services and more service providers? Where are banks with that kind of collaboration piece? And so maybe I could start with you, Andre, and you could give us the bank's view on those questions.
Sure, thank you. So first of all, I just want to say I think we're really unlucky here because we're running this session next to the demo session, which is obviously much more interesting than listening to us. But hopefully we have a couple of followers still. But what do we need? I think short, simple answer, we need much more, right? We need partners. We need to collaborate. We need to do more. Banks have a couple of core strengths that we can play with. Obviously, a lot of fintechs are much, much better than we are in producing beautiful platforms, user experience, all of that. So we need a lot more cooperation. And if I don't do it here, then someone else will do it, and then I will lose out.
Great. And Hannah, maybe from a fintech perspective, do you have any sort of more thoughts on where collaboration is and maybe what banks need to be doing in respect of those opportunities to get more that Andre's talking about?
Yeah, I think just backing up 10 years, right? There was a lot of discussion who will win this war, if you like, the banks, the incumbents, or the fintech. And I think we all have moved somewhat into the middle, right? And everyone's realizing that we're much better off just collaborating and working together. So I think in that way, we're in a much better place today. In terms of, the fintech space, and I'm sure we will come to that, but the whole ecosystem that has been created, right, and allowing us to collaborate, it becomes somewhat a best of breed solution that we all provide to the customers in the end. And I think, there's definitely a role for the banks to continue to play, not least with regards to the cost of capital and being a provider of capital. And then I'm sure we touch more upon it, but the whole regulatory framework, right, where we still need the banks to provide all those provisions to stay within the guidelines of Finansinspektionen and SEC or whatever the financial regulator, right? So I think, I'll leave it at that for now, but I think collaboration is the best.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. Maybe Michael, where do you see sort of the bank's role ultimately heading? Is it just going to end up, a capital pool, like a strong capital pool? Is there still that, product and service function? I mean, yeah, what do you see from your perspective?
Well, I think, just to make sure you can hear me, great. Well, I think that if you look at the way banks will look in the future, if you will, or how banks will evolve, banks will either own customers, right? Or they're going to own the means of serving the customer, right? And I think when you look at how I have more of a bit of a technical lens, I guess you could say, but I think we view banks as, in order to stay relevant, as needing to become a bit more tech-centric, right? And have a heavy focus on more of a tech-first type of approach when it comes to that, right? I think we try to break it down really into three main pillars for banks to really be competitive, at least from our perspective in the future. One is, of course, becoming more tech-centric, as is mentioned, right? And employing more outsourced solutions and trying to see fintechs as partners, which is what we're all kind of discussing today. I think two is now look also at not just from a tech perspective, but also from an operational perspective, how can they become more reactive and agile in the manner of deploying products, services, and maybe best utilizing data, for example. And three is the collaborative approach, right? I firmly believe that it is important for banks to take a collaborative approach when it comes to the fintech, but also to technology in general.
Okay, yeah, no, that's really helpful. I mean, maybe building a bit on that competitiveness theme, we have touched slightly, I think, Hannah, you touched slightly on the regulatory environment. And I know, Mital, it's something that is close to your heart at the moment, given developments in Israel. But maybe just thinking a bit about sort of that regulatory playing field, you know, is that kind of helping, or is that not really helping banks at the moment? And how is that the whole kind of regulatory picture really playing into that, the competitiveness of this marketplace?
Yeah, well, it depends who you're asking. I think that we need to have regulations. We cannot do. It's like men, right? We cannot do with them or without them. It's like we need to pick. But I think that there must be a one fits all regulation, because for now the regulator thinks that they want to act as more competitive, and they want to be more agile to the market, and they want to create competition inside the market. And what they are doing now is that they are putting very heavy regulation on the banks, while the fintechs are not that regulated, or not the same as the banks, let's say, and it caused a lot of frustration in the banks. And on the other side, while we want to collaborate with fintechs, they need to handle all the regulations that we need to handle. So I think that it should be different. I think that we need more open-minded with the regulator. And we need to understand that we have to have rules, because we are keeping the money for our customers. But on the other hand, we want to be relevant, and we want to be as fast as a fintech company. But we have a lot of regulation on our back that we need to comply with. So it's a very it's a very thin line that we need to go through in order to be both to be good for all, let's say.
Yeah. So maybe I mean, you're sort of differentiating between, you know, how regulation is perhaps impacting on a traditional banking institutions versus how it's impacting on fintechs, but then also recognizing that, you know, where collaboration needs to occur, fintech businesses obviously need to have that regulatory compliance mindset, understand and to some degree comply. I mean, maybe Anna, Michael, from the fintech perspective, how do you interact with that? How do you see the regulatory situation at the moment?
Maybe Hannah, do you want to start? I'll take over after.
Okay, ladies first.
Sure.
No, I view this very seriously, right? It's a difficult topic in some sense, because we do need to play into the level playing field, but at the same time we need to open up and keep the competitiveness. And I think the way the fintech can approach it, and I think the way we view it, is that there is a time and place, or rather there are players that are really good with the regulatory. it could be collaborating with a bank, or take a mega trend right now, AML and KYC, for example. There isn't one client out there that is not talking about this or spending money on it. And it becomes a crucial part of the onboarding process, whether you're dealing with corporate clients or retail clients, right? And to that, we try to obviously help and facilitate with that, the plumbing around the onboarding process as well. But there are other parties that are, again, best of breed and really strong in AML, KYC in particular, that we collaborate with. So that's one way of just finding, I guess, ways to get around it, or how we should call it.
I think to build on that, right, Mambu, our core role, of course, is a bit more in the core banking space, and we work with lots of different fintechs around the world. And I think while the definition of core banking is changing, the definition of a bank is essentially, quote unquote, changing through the fintech landscape. I mean, if you look at some of the fintechs in the Nordics, I think in 2019 on the Stockholm Fintech Week panel, Morten from Lunar Way, I think he talked about how when they went through their regulation process, that almost got the feeling that the regulator might have not understood the business model, right? And we hear time and time again throughout the world of different fintechs coming into the space, one, themselves trying to figure out what they're classified as, and two, trying to also educate, I think, a regulator around what their business model might even be. But three, I think where I've seen a bit of collaboration and how this has resulted in success is where the fintechs and the banks have actually worked a bit together, in the sense of the fintech kind of bringing the bank into the world through a different landscape or a different lens, if you will, trying to show them a different way of financial services than they may be privy to. An example could be, for example, New10 and ABN AMRO, but also the bank having the historical regulations and compliance scrutiny that they've had, kind of introducing and maybe helping to evolve that as well.
By the way, just to add on it,
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is the secret of success, what Michael said, because once both sides understand that they have the same goal and the same interests to succeed, and the same KPIs, let's say, I think that this is the way to collaborate. Otherwise, each one of them, one is talking tech and the other is talking finance, and they are not meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I can really, see that, and I think there's been a movement, a big movement in the whole marketplace over the last couple of years, like Hannah identified, to come more central. But maybe, Andre, you could give us some views on kind of the maturity of this fintech space. How does BNP Paribas experience like the maturity of fintechs in this space? Is there still more that could be done, both from a regulatory and compliance perspective within the fintechs themselves, but also maybe as you're looking to invest or collaborate with fintechs, and also as well as maturity, maybe scope and range of what's kind of out there in the market. Is there anything that you're seeing kind of major opportunities that are not currently being filled?
Yeah, lots of questions here. Just coming back to the regulatory point first. So the way I look at this is probably slightly different than the average banker. I think fintechs help us drive regulations forward. And just take an example that we've been discussing for the last 5 years or so, but PSD2 and the APIs and all of that, breaking up the data and sort of allowing fintechs, entering the banking system. I mean, that's just an enabler for really beautiful products, and a sort of, I don't understand how we could operate before PSD2. That's my point of view. Coming back to the questions about technology and sort of maturity, obviously sort of core banking is asset management, it's lending, it's credit, it's payments. There I think we have more mature new technology, and it's easier for us banks to work with mature new technology. If we look at the really sort of cutting edge stuff, and I'm no technology expert, but sort of AI, blockchain, and etc., then it's more challenging because it's so new to us, and sort of, I mean, in the end, we have regulatory capital that's cash, right? It's core tier one equity, etc., and we need to make cash to support our core tier one equity, etc., etc. So, these old new technologies are easier for us to monetize, whereas the new, really funky stuff is difficult to plug into operations to work with. So for the future, I mean, asset management, lending, KYC, all the regulatory stuff, it's super interesting. It's sort of getting slightly old now. I'm really looking forward to when my own business, I'm more into the advisory space, when my business is getting disrupted by AI, for example, when the advisory business, when we can make processes much more simpler. Because my team and myself, we spend a lot of hours in the office. I think we have a lot to do here.
And maybe that sort of lends itself. We've actually had a question on the live discussion, and the question is fairly broad. Is it beneficial for banks to outsource software development to external companies? And maybe I don't know whether anybody has a view on that. So it's about outsourcing software development to external companies. Is that actually a benefit, or is it better to keep that in house?
It depends who you want to start. I mean, I'm probably a bit biased here, but I would say yes. I think it's another slogan that we have, innovate or die, not to make anyone terrified. But I do think that if you're going to become a reactive bank and try to become a little bit more fast paced, right? You can't always be the best in everything. You're the best in banking, but maybe not the best in some aspects of your technology, right? And so some parts of these are beneficial to outsource to, whether it be via a SaaS component or some other sorts. And that allows banks to also become a bit more flexible, right? So you can easily kind of let someone else do a best of breed approach for you. And to your point, Andre, if there are these complex or far advanced technologies that aren't quite understood, for example, from compliance teams or so on, right, then maybe that might be the work of that outsourced provider to help assist on that journey and be the best in understanding what that means from a bank perspective. So my answer is yeah, I think so.
But I'd like to add to that, because financial software doesn't necessarily have to sit with a bank or a fintech, right? It can very well sit within non-financial players. And I think we're going to see huge growth in that area with embedded finance. And that will be perhaps a bit more disruptive than, to your point, just adding processes around AML, KYC to speed up onboarding. But I think you will notice that pretty much every sector, every company, right, are financial services already, in the sense that they do deal with payments, or they do have their own invoicing structures, etc. So they're already into that cash flow mindset. And if you are there and you add financial technology on top of that, you could easily provide your own customers with financial solutions, for example, lending or extending credit, etc., etc.
I think that's a really kind of deep answer to the question, and I think the answer probably in some cases, but not necessarily in all, and it's not necessarily just a bank fintech like dichotomy, as we often fall into that sort of, is it in this or is it in that, and it's not really like that, this marketplace. I think looking at one of the next questions that we have here, just trying to keep this kind of relevant to the participants we have here. I think it's looking at the future. So this is the question, and we've got a kind of a future-looking piece, on our topics that we talked about as well. The question is about post-COVID. How do you, panel participants in general, handle the dilemma between the need for more digitalization and then the greater tendency to focus on short-term cost, kind of cost management, due to kind of maybe outcomes from the crisis? And I think, that's also looking at that future picture. What else in this space is really needed to help to move the whole industry forward, both post-COVID? Is it just digitalization? Is it just digitalize everything? or are there particular priorities around, we've heard a lot about sustainability here, and are there particular priorities around that we ought to be focusing on, as we move forward and look to the future? I don't know, Michal, do you want to start with that question about the future looking and kind of those bigger priorities?
Yes, I think my answer would be that it depends on the digital stage of the bank. So if the organization is digital enough or has a good value proposition for its customers, so it would have the ability to handle other issues like sustainability and everything else around it. But if a bank don't have the basics in digital and not good enough, let's say, I think that it would have problem to handle this crisis. So I think that we can see that all the banks are moving to digital. They want to give the best experience to their customers first, and then they can handle the other stuff, because this becomes the basic, the new norm, let's say. So I think that this is that we will see the next step. I don't know when it will over this pandemic, but for now it's good for digital, not good for everyone else.
Yes, I mean, looking at the time, we've got just a couple of minutes left. So does anybody else want to jump in on that kind of future-looking topic?
Maybe I can just add to what Michael said before, with banks being tech-enabled and tech-first. So I think my perspective is slightly different. If we mean with technology first, if we mean client first, providing safe solutions, providing the user experience, being the bank who represent trust, etc., then I totally agree. And then we should use all the technology we can to make that happen. And it should be third-party providers or whoever can develop that technology. We shouldn't do it ourselves. But when I think looking into the future, we are lazy, the end users are lazy, everyone wants to have nice, beautiful products. It should be streamlined, it should be made easy. And then we can't just our sort of framework, the regulatory framework and the security standards and how we deal with money and anti-laundering, it needs to be second to none.
I think just one more thing to add to that really quick that we're seeing as well is it's not just about technology. And I know I've been talking a lot about technology, but I think the quick reaction to COVID and how to recover, right, is there's going to be a lot of potential, economic crises, right? And how can you, as a bank, take on a social responsibility to make your loans more affordable, right? How can you lower your operational costs? Is that by technology, or is that by potentially partnering with a fintech, for example, an SME fintech that lends to various SMEs that traditionally are too not so margin profitable for a bank? And that might be a fast, quick way to address that market, but also start to introduce the concept of transformation and become a bit more fintech forward. So.
Yeah, okay, that's great.
So I dropped.
We have 1 minute left, I think, before we end the panel here. So thank you, everyone, for your contributions. There's a couple of other questions, I think, on the chat that we can probably pick up afterwards. And thank you, everyone, for your time for today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for this interesting panel. Thank you all. And this will also be the last session for today on the Fintech and Dreams track. Yeah, we have our Fintech and Dreams t-shirt on today. So thank you for this. I think it's been super interesting. And I also just want to mention that there is plenty of networking opportunities open in the entire week. Now we had a session on banks in the future. We have more than 300 startups signed up for the event here who want to work with you on different solutions. So hopefully a lot of banks and fintech startups can find each other during Fintech Week. If not, Copenhagen Fintech is all about doing these matches afterwards. So if you need help in finding the right match, then we're here for you. Sebastian,
Yeah,
reflections?
it's been a pleasure. Of course, we're not over for today yet. We still have demo sessions ongoing as we speak. And we still have a few sessions on the global sustainability track left for today. Other than that, we look forward to picking up again tomorrow and hope you all stay safe until then.
See you tomorrow.